Okay, Jeff, so why don't you give us a little bit of information on your style or technique of winemaking?
Well, first and foremost, I limit myself only to red wines. But I don't limit myself to one particular appellation. So, the red wines come from 5 different regions in California, depending on the flavor and the character that I'm looking for. We do Pinot Noir, Dolcetto, and Cabernet Sauvignon from the Napa Valley, but we're primarily known for our wines from Amador. And stylistically, we're renowned for a fruit-forward nature, where the flavors are, there's a nice representation of, and a nice reflection of what the grape tasted like. And that's where the differentiation comes to, for the most part, is from how, just as a Granny Smith tastes different than a Honeycrisp and then a Red Delicious, varietally, these wines have different flavors for a genetic reason. The other thing that we try and do is load up as much flavor and character as possible, and we do this by small bin fermentations. These are fermentations that occur in small half-ton white harvest bins, and everything is punched down by hand. Typically when a red wine is fermenting, the carbon dioxide given off by the yeast lifts the skins up and out of the wine. It's just as if you're taking a tea bag out of the hot water. Until you put it back in, you're not extracting flavor into the liquid. So, depending on how the grapes are returned into that liquid, determines how much flavor, color, and pigment is extracted into the wine. It also tells how much tannin, extract, and how much coarseness. So, early on in the fermentation, we'll punch down very vigorously, primarily because there's very little alcohol. At the conclusion of fermentation, when alcohol can act as a solvent, we'll punch down but once or twice a day. Typically the fermentations last for a week, and at the conclusion the must is lifted and put into a press without being pumped. And I think that has a lot to do with the supple texture that we have without any bitterness.
The other thing that I heard you mention too is that you're not fully extracting from the grape, so you're not getting a bitter taste or...
That's right. A lot of the bitterness that I find in wines tends to come from the seed rather than the skin. So we're very careful not to damage the seeds, crush them, chip them in transporting the must from one portion of the crushing and destemming stage to the fermentation. The must is not pumped. As soon as the grapes are concluded with having their stems removed and being crushed, they fall directly into the vessel in which they're going to ferment. They are not pumped into a tank or to some other location on the winery.
And I think the other thing is that you get a lower yield at that point.
We do. We do not squeeze to 170, 175 gallons per ton. Our typical yield is closer to 157 to 162 gallons. And that extra few gallons, I think you can tell the difference, and you could taste it, and there might be a coarseness or a bitterness that I certainly don't want to involve.
Okay, wonderful. And then as far as the oak barrels that these go into, I noticed that primarily you're using a combination of French and American oak.
We use both French and American oak from different locations, from different forests in Europe, and also different techniques in which the barrels are produced. For example, I had an opportunity to visit a cooperage in Lebanon, Missouri, where I discovered that I could direct or request that the flame and the fire in which is used to toast the interior of that barrel doesn't necessarily have to be oak. So for our Syrah, that barrel is toasted over a hickory flame. And there are some folks that detect a nuance and a subtlety to the smoky flavor in our Syrah, and I attribute that to the fact that that barrel was produced over a hickory fire instead of an oak fire.
And actually, it's the Syrah that introduced us to Jeff Runquist wines and how we got on the bandwagon. And so we've really enjoyed, our success with this wine. And then I mentioned on the previous video our success with 1448, where we completely sold out in, I would say, 36 hours, and we had to put in a rush order to get 5 more cases for the tasting this week. This has been an absolute success. We've sold a tremendous amount of wine, and we've had a lot of people through the shop here to do the wine tasting, especially today with Jeff being here. And we thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Yes, and if you're ever in Plymouth, you have to stop by the tasting room and get a little slice of that yourself. And your wife is in the tasting room?
My wife Margie keeps it all running.
She is absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.